Mynoo100, thank you for doing an excellent video response. But there are many points we disagree on. Firstly, the euro is not a weak currency. The euro is worth more than $1, and over 40% of the world's reserves of currencies is held in euros, and that's increased since 2003. Also, even the Saudis and the Iranians have said that they would like to sell oil in euros. Doesn't this show that there is a movement towards the euro becoming eventually the world's reserve currency? Now, correctly you said that whenever a country becomes an empire, it has thus overextended itself, because if you look at the history of the United States became an empire from a colony system, and then turned itself around from being an empire into a nation state. Now, this would be the task of Europe. If Europe was to become a hyperpower, it would not function in exactly the same way as the United States, but it would need to set itself the task of becoming a nation state, and that would mean having a president, a directly elected parliament. These are all things that, and also, most importantly, control over its own money supply and credit, and that would mean having a euro treasury bond. Now, the problem is your perception of how a European hyperpower would function. Well, I would say it would be a very subtle hyperpower. It would be more like Persia than Rome in a sense. Because, if from a historical example, because it would, or more like the Vatican than the Roman Empire in a sense, because it uses laws and economics to change the ways and behaviour of the countries that are around it. This is what I spoke about in Fabian economics, anti-terrorism, and the use, which can be shortened to the use of the word of incrementalism. That is a small steps, cutting each process down to the very small steps to attain overall victory. That is to cut the enemy's economic links, and also change the actual physical landscape and infrastructure of countries around Europe, so that they do not actually become enemies in the first place. That is how victory is attained without actually using war. If Europe did use military forces and military hyperpower, it would probably be through peacekeeping, because all the other fundamental steps towards victory would have been made before the actual implementation of troops being put down on the ground. Now, you said about weapons. Why would British people not be able to master German weapons? I myself have fired a G36, that's a German weapon, and it's far more easier than an SA-80 to use, because I used to be in the TA. I know this, right? There are far fewer parts in the G36 rifle than there are in an SA-80 rifle. That doesn't mean that I'm a gun nut, but it just means that I know these things. Now, the Typhoon, the Eurofighter, is already being used by British forces, and Germans also use British-made equipment. So I don't see a problem there. What we will be able to do is to take the best of each kind of training and equipment, just like the Americans do. The Americans will use European equipment if it's better. They just will only build it in America and stamp it with a US flag and USA on the outside of it, and still call it American built, but it's not actually American designed. Europe would not function in the same way as an American force. The Americans see every problem as a nail, because all they've got is a hammer. Yeah. The Europeans will use economics, will use aid, will use incentives, will use technology and information to overcome their enemies in such a way that the enemy doesn't actually know that it's being overcome at the time. It's a very subtle hyperpower. Okay. What the difference between Europe and the United States as hyperpowers is as different between Fox News and Euronews, or Fox News and the BBC, right? In terms of tone and attitude, let me try and put it that way. You said that you were not happy. You were quite happy with the Bank of England not being democratic. Well, the European Commission is the civil service of Europe, and it votes on everything, and it's oversight. It has oversight. Sorry, the oversight of the European Parliament is over the civil service. That's something we do not have in this country, in Britain. And I do not believe that if every country that makes up the United Kingdom was part of the EU, that it would lead to the breakup of the UK. I just don't believe that. I believe that there might be an English Parliament, but I don't believe that there would be the breakup of the United Kingdom. It would be a federalisation of the United Kingdom. Just because Germany is federalised does not mean that Germany is broken up into many different little states that are all completely independent. There is some autonomy, yes, but just as that would just be over tax and spending. Whoever controls the central bank, which would be England, you can argue that it's still England, has the real sovereignty over a nation, right? And I would like the central bank to be much more democratic. I believe that the European Central Bank is slightly more democratic than the Bank of England. But you did mention some very good points about the Bank of England, and I wasn't trying to hoodwink anybody about it. But they do have to send a letter to the Chancellor, and the government does have oversight, but they only have oversight over how much they're going to spend. There is a two-way streak of information going between the Bank of England and the government, but who is the upper hand really depends on the context and circumstance, and whether the money supply is the driving force behind the economy, and it usually is, because inflation has to go up every 2% per year to keep the wages in equilibrium. It's not when you get an equalisation of wages, is when wages at the bottom go up and wages at the top come down, and bosses don't like that. But I would say that would be a good thing for wages to be equal. There has to be some equalisation, but I think we can both agree that we both want Europe to be the freest, best place to live in the world. It's just different ways to do that, and I'd like your next vid to explain how you would try and change Europe to be that way, and I would try and do a similar vid. But I would just like to say Europe would be a subtle hyperpower and would thus defeat China and be a strong ally of the United States. I'm not anti-American. I want the United States and the European Union to make the Atlantic our Mare Nostrum, our sea, to have free trade between the United States and the European Union, and to make the Middle East and North Africa and the Western Asia, which at the moment is controlled by Russia, up to Ukraine, to be our sphere of influence, and also Africa as well. I'd like a Southern African Union based on the EU model, and an East African Union based on the EU model, so we can get those evil bastards, the Bin Ladens, out of Africa and out of the Middle East, and put them 6 feet under where they belong, and other crime families like them, and also that we can get China out of Africa, and also make an alliance between Europe, Iran and India, and so we can have an arc of Indo-European influence all the way to the Pacific. Okay, I would even accept Russia as part of the EU eventually, but the reason why Greece has such a large army is because they are almost at war with Turkey all the time, and EU is a way to solve conflicts, so that's why it would be a subtle hyperpower. Thank you for listening. Peace.